Capacitor test. A capacitor stores a small charge of static electricity, and it contains two plates that do not touch, which is why the symbol looks the way it does. A capacitor and a condenser are the exact same device. To test a capacitor, first select the ohms function and press the select button 3 times. You'll see the capacitor symbol appear. Discharge the capacitor by shorting across the 2 leads with a conductor. Or in the case of high voltages, above 24 volts, a resistor is recommended. Capacitors may have a polarity, as indicated by the markings on the side, or by the longer positive lead. Connect the red and black probes to the capacitor and wait. The meter will fill the capacitor with static electricity and will determine the size by timing the measurement. There will usually be a difference between the marked capacitance and the measured capacitance.
Caution! Large capacitors in high voltage systems are extremely dangerous. It's very important that you follow all manufacturer's instructions as it relates to those machines and those capacitors. At the very least, all capacitors should be shorted safely using a ceramic resistor of approximately 100 ohms with alligator clips, which will allow the different charge, the static charge in the capacitor to dissipate and the 2 sides to equalize, making the capacitor safe. If you don't do that, the capacitor can be extremely dangerous. So make sure that you understand what a capacitor is and how it works and how to safe it before you start testing. If you try to test with the meter with a fully charged capacitor, there's a very good chance that the meter will be damaged. So before you use capacitor test, make sure that it's discharged and it's stable and that you're not trying to test a capacitor that's going to blow the meter up or harm you. It could happen, and just use extreme caution when you test capacitors. The capacitor check is designed to give you the opportunity to check the operation of a smallish capacitor. Okay? What you do is you simply short the capacitor out carefully using a screwdriver or some other device, or in the case of larger or maybe higher voltage capacitors, you want to use a shorting clip with a resistor in it. Once it's shorted and once it's completely discharged, you simply hook the meter up to the capacitor in proper polarity. Polarized or electrolytic capacitors must be connected in proper polarity. If you don't connect them in proper polarity, the test and the capacitor will not work. These capacitors are typically blue or brown or some color, and they will always have a stripe on the side indicating the negative side of the cathode of the capacitor. Now, a capacitor and a condenser are the same thing, so there is no difference. It's just 2 different names from 2 different groups. The British call it a capacitor usually or originally, and we called it a condenser. Okay, so you simply move to the capacitor check, which is on the ohm diode continuity capacitor check. You hit the select button until you see the diode disregard, until you see the NF or nanofarads in the bottom right corner, which is the measurement for a capacitor. Farads, named for Faraday. The size of the capacitor will be written on the side of the capacitor, and you can simply measure what the capacitor is and then compare it to what's on the side. Very few capacitors are perfect. There's always a pretty good margin of slop in there. So depending upon what your capacitor is in microfarads or nanofarads, it will never be farads because a farad is huge, massively gigantic. So you simply connect the leads into the capacitor in proper polarity. If it's a non-polarized capacitor, they are usually silver, sometimes oval in shape, and they will not have a polarity marking on them. Those can be connected in any direction, and they're usually used in AC. You simply connect the leads to the capacitor and wait. The meter will fill up the capacitor, and when the capacitor is full, the meter will check the time that it took to do it at a given amperage, and then it will tell you the size of the capacitor in either nano or microfarads. Capacitors are either good or they're not. So if the meter does not fill up or it never shows you a number, then the capacitor has failed. The capacitor will also be failed if you see straight zeros on the voltmeter. So if you see 0, 0, 0, 0 on the voltmeter, then that means the internal workings of the capacitor, the two plates are touching, the capacitor has failed. All right, for the capacitor check, that's the last function here on this ohms, diode, beeper, capacitor, and they're in order. So the order in which you're going to hit them are ohms, diode, beep, capacitor. So you hit once, diode, twice, beeper, and then the third time is capacitor check. Okay, so what you have to do to test a capacitor, there's a polarity. Okay, some capacitors have polarity, some do not. There's usually a pretty clear marking here, so this would be the negative lead right here, okay, because it shows negative pointing to this side. Okay, so you have to short that out. Okay, you have to make sure there's nothing in the capacitor, and then it's a very simple matter of simply connecting it in and letting the meter work. Okay, the meter will drop off, and then it will fill up the capacitor. Then you can hit the hold button. It'll hold your number. And the answer is 2,614 nanofarads, or microfarads, excuse me. And this is 2,800 microfarads. And the meter's reading 2614. The meter's not broken, but no capacitor is perfect. Okay, so here is a 4,700 microfarad. I'll hook it up in proper polarity. Turn the whole feature off and clip this in, and it's 4,700, and it comes up with 4,326. So this is 4,326 microfarads. Okay, so that's a reasonably good sized capacitor. 1 farad is huge, so you'll probably never see one of those. But at any rate, that's all you have to do for the capacitor check, and just make sure that the capacitor is zeroed out or shorted out so there's no voltage in it beforehand as a safety feature. If it's a high voltage capacitor, I recommend you use a resistor of some kind to jump across with a resistor. And that's capacitor check.